With a record-breaking number of women serving in Congress, I wanted to investigate exactly how men and women differ in their voting patterns, if at all. Specifically, I wanted to see which sex was the most likely to vote away from their party, which sex is most likely to go against the group, and vote based on their individual beliefs and values. In my beginning research, I spent much of my time understanding the concept of a double bind. A double bind is a phenomenon in which there are two choices that lead to losses. It is known as a doomed if you do, doomed if you don't situation, since it is impossible to escape. Women in politics face a double bind of their own, described by former Senator Carol Moseley Braun as the very, very fine line of being a shrew on one hand and a puppet on the other. Women in politics cannot be too polite and agreeable, unless they want to be seen as weak and subservient. They cannot be too aggressive and combative, unless they want to be seen as emotional and bossy. No matter what they do, they will be called something. With this understanding of the unique challenges women face in Congress, I formulated my hypothesis as follows. Women are less likely to be ideologically extreme in Congress, since they will be more likely to come under the negative effects of the double bind, and thus be less comfortable voting outside the average. This hypothesis needs three components. First, I need to find a way of measuring ideological patterns from voting. Second, I need to define what constitutes someone's voting as extreme. Third, I need to find how to compare men and women to each other. The first part of this can be done with DW nominate scores, available from voteview.org. DW nominate scores turn a congressperson's voting records into a map of their ideological position along two dimensions, economic and other. This allows you to directly compare any two congresspeople and see general ideological trends over time. With a reliable method of viewing ideology by voting, I moved to define what extreme means. I decided to create an average of each session of Congress, giving me a picture of each session's overall ideological makeup. This allows me to compare women and men to each other and to the average, to find which group is farther away. Distance from the average will represent extremeness, since it represents an ideology far away from the average per session. The farther someone is from the average, the more ideologically extreme they are. Next, I computed sex-specific averages per session for both men and women. This allows me to compare men and women to the average per session so that we can see who was farther from the session's average. The final step is to subtract the sex averages per session from the total averages per session, as this will show which sex was further away from the average. To view my results, I created these graphs. The first two are the distance from the average DW nominate score each sex was, which represents extremeness. This is a linear graph, and due to the exponential growth of women in Congress over the past decades, the data looks better if arranged on a logarithmic scale. Now, it is very easy to see who is more likely to be distant from the average. Given the inverse nature of logarithms, the closer a value is to zero, the greater it is. This means that, on average, women are much more likely to be ideologically distant from the average than men. This holds for both dimensions. As more women join Congress, the overall average moves closer to them, so this explains some of the convergence between the two lines, but not all. This result is significant for two reasons. One, the ideological gap between men and women was much higher when the first women were beginning to enter Congress. Clearly, these women were not stuck in a double bind, or if they were, they simply chose to ignore it. Second is that women are consistently more likely to go against the average than men are. Given that each year more and more women are joining Congress, one might expect to see a breakdown of traditional party unity. If women are more likely to go their own way on a vote, it may be harder for a majority female party to have the same level of cohesion a male-dominated party has. With these results, more research is needed about the relationship between the double bind and someone's willingness to go against the average. Why were the first women so likely to be ideologically extreme, given that sexism and discrimination was worse than it is today? Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.